In this video, I'm just going to introduce the concept of pure rational choice procedures and how probability is added to the pure rational choice procedure model. Now, the reason we're interested in this is not so much because we're interested in pure rational choice procedures. It's more because we can almost never implement them. They're an ideal. So what we're actually interested in is how best can we approximate pure rational choice given the time and resources and information processing capability that we have. So the idea of a pure rational choice procedure was developed as this kind of ideal, and it has a few components to it. I'm going to illustrate it using something that you've probably all been through in recent weeks, which is choosing your courses for this semester. And I want you to imagine a student who's in a situation where they need to do 4 courses this semester, and they are in the happy position of being able to choose from a list of 100 electives. Now, the first thing we're interested in there is what we call alternatives. And in that case, there's a very large number of alternatives to consider. So what we mean by an alternative there is a set of 4 courses to enroll in. And if you've got a choice of 100, there's slightly less than about 4 million alternatives. That might sound surprising, but that kind of huge number of alternatives is something that arises very commonly when we are looking at alternatives which are subsets of things. So the student is faced there with a huge number of alternatives. There's no way in the world that she's going to be able to consider all of them. But in a pure rational choice world, this hypothetical world, indeed she would. The second component of the pure rational choice model is about the consequences of each alternative. So we're talking about 4 million or so alternatives, and what would happen in a perfect world is our student would be aware of the consequences of every possible alternative. And by consequences, what we're actually getting at is that a choice of a consequence is expected to have some kind of causal effect on what happens later. And what happens later might be connected with, for example, how much she enjoys the courses, or later on the effects on employment or entrepreneurial opportunities, or whatever. They might be consequences about the effect on her GPA. Some of the courses might be more difficult than others. Some of them may be better or less well suited to her academic strengths, and so on. There might be timetable clashes in some cases. So these things are all consequences, and they are all in some sense causally connected to the choice of alternatives, remembering that an alternative here is a set of 4 courses. Now, the third thing that we need to incorporate in the model here is what's called preferences. Now, these are sometimes called criteria. So the preferences are the kind of weightings that the decision maker gives to different consequences. So if the student's main concern is keeping a high GPA or getting to the next level of a GPA, then she might look for a choice of courses that are very well matched to her strengths, so she's confident of getting high marks. Or she might even look for courses that have a reputation for awarding high marks. So that is an indication of her preferences. But in most decision-making situations, we have quite a lot of preferences, and we have to, in making the decision, do something to work out the relative strength of our preferences for different consequences. And then the fourth component is what's known as a decision rule. So that is a procedure for weighing up preferences and consequences of each alternative so that you can choose the very best alternative. And there are a number of ways we do this in practice. How you would do it theoretically in a perfect pure rational choice procedure is frankly not that clear, but it's something that you would need to have for it to meet that standard. And then the final thing, which is not a component of the model, but it's an assumption that is made here, is that the decision maker has complete knowledge. They actually know what all the 4 million or so alternatives are. They know what their preferences are. They can weight them in some way. They can make decisions. They know about all of the courses. They can kind of predict the future and know what the causal consequences are. So that's the pure rational choice procedure. And it's very nice in theory, but in practice, we're almost never really able to achieve that. Now, there's an extension of the pure rational choice theory where we add in the element of probability. So what all this does is it adds to the model the idea that we can't predict consequences with absolute certainty. So rather than knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, we know the probabilities associated with all of the consequences. And then when we're evaluating the alternatives in terms of our preferences, we can do our calculations, we can build a decision rule that takes into account probabilities. And so this extension of the model has been used in studying decision making, particularly in the context of, I think, artificial intelligence and so on, to build in knowledge of probabilities rather than being able to deterministically, so exactly, predict the future. So that's all for this video. So all I've done here is describe the pure rational choice model, which is a kind of ideal decision-making procedure, but one that is almost never realized in the real world. But the reason that we're interested in it is we want to use it as a kind of benchmark. So when we look at real decision procedures, what we do is we compare them. You know, how many alternatives can be considered? How do we choose which ones are considered? And similarly with consequences, which consequences are most important? How do we choose which ones we actually analyze? How do we get the preferences? And how do we operationalize? How do we implement a decision rule? Okay, thank you.